Housing, education, and economic development, how Governor Joe Lombardo plans to tackle each this year. That's this week on Nevada Week.
Support for Nevada Week is provided by Senator William H. Hernstedt.
Welcome to Nevada Week. I'm Amber Renee Dixon. The 2025 legislative session begins on February 3rd, and it'll mark Joe Lombardo's second legislative session as Nevada's governor. Ahead of it, the Republican governor delivered a State of the State address from Carson City, and for analysis on the policies he's proposing, we spoke with former Nevada Assemblywoman and Clark County Commissioner Giunchigiani, a Democrat, and from former State Senator Warren Hardy, a Republican and principal consultant for his firm, Warren Hardy Strategies. Let's start out with first impressions from each of you. Chris, you go first.
I have to say, the governor was so much more relaxed, more personable, more confident, and that translates that he's kind of warmed up into the job. And that makes a difference because then it makes him more approachable. And I think when you have approachability, you can build relationships. And that's something that leads to good governing. So,
and also important because he will be facing re-election.
Exactly.
All right, what about from you, Warren?
Well, I agree completely with Chris. I think from last year, far more comfortable, far more comfortable with the role in general, not just the speech. But I also think he did exactly what he needed to do to hit the bipartisan message. I noticed numerous bipartisan rounds of applause, even standing applause. That's been a while since we've seen that in this state. And I know just talking to his staff, I haven't spoken with the governor personally, but talking with his staff, they're sincere about that, about the bipartisan, trying to bridge that gap. The other thing that struck me is this is a governor that has clearly earned some political capital with the public, with the people of the state of Nevada. He's got high approval ratings. It's a game of political capital. He's going to spend some of that political capital. Some of the conversation about, going back to a vote of the people if necessary, that reminded me of a tactic Ronald Reagan used, the old bully pulpit that, look, I want to work with Congress, but if I can't, there's alternatives here. So that's clearly a governor that understands he's built some goodwill and some political capital with the voters. And it's going to be a different experience this session.
And he is also planning on spending some money, which we will cover ahead. But I first want to ask you, Chris, well, the Nevada Democratic Party will be issuing a response to this. It will be available on the Nevada Legislature's YouTube page and on our website as well, vegaspbs.org. But what do you think Democrats would take issue with this address?
I think globally, it hit on many of the points that we all care about as Nevadans. So I think I would prefer to look at it as where did it give us a place to start from, to work from? I do think that they may take issue, I do as well, with how much money is going into the rainy day fund, for example. Great that you didn't raise taxes, but people aren't paying taxes to have it just sit in a fund. So if you need to pay for childcare, if you need to pay for pre-K, use some of that money. So that could be some place that they can maneuver and take a look at how that money is allocated. Voter ID will be a difference of opinion from seeing where they were last session, and the governor went ahead and put it on the ballot, and he's right. It'll come back to the ballot again in 2 years if they don't do something this time around. I think the devil is in the details on that, and there's an opportunity on how you look at how people have access to proper ID, but that's something that they'll have to flesh out. I think in the long run, I know that he mentioned, and thank you as a former retired teacher, that the salaries will be made permanent now in the budget for the teachers. I'm not sure that they left state employees out. I can't remember if they had one-shot money only, but you don't want to divide your hard worker bees, because they are who make this. They make the governor look good because they're the ones carrying out the mission at the state level.
You're referring to last legislative session. Yes. He got through good raises for state employees. Also for teachers, that was one-time funding.
Correct.
But now when he says his budget makes that permanent for teachers, it's going to continue into
it goes into the roll-up for how they deal with the budget from here on out. So yes, that was a scary thing. That's what you saw across the state, and many people were negotiating different language in case the money didn't come forward this time around. Now I could hear a deep sigh coming across the state from teachers in the classroom that will be happy about that. And it's not just them; it's support personnel and administration. I would know. School choice will be another debate. So that will be.
He did not say much about that compared to his prior State of the State address. Do you want to respond to anything that Chris said about the rainy day fund or the spending?
No, I think she's spot on. I will say this: the rainy day thing seems to be a little bit of a generational thing, because I think it's too high as well. I mean, when I was in the Senate, used to tease Senator Raggio, who was a big fan of the rainy day fund and helped push it. I used to call it the overtaxation fund. I think 1.3 billion is a lot of money, and I like that number to be around 500 million. Now, we're in unprecedented times. We're a little bit shocked because of what happened with COVID. So I understand the overreaction, but I think it might be overreaction. I don't know that the Democrats will push back that hard on it for that reason. That there's like, okay, look, we just got now the fires in California, and it doesn't seem as unreasonable as I used to think it was. I do agree on the state employees. I do think that's a question. I haven't seen the budget. He didn't mention it. But I didn't see the budget. I was very surprised too. He didn't mention, at least I didn't hear mention of opportunity scholarships, which I expected might be a priority, and I know will be for the Republican legislature. So
right. I mean, he simply said, "I believe in school choice." I know some of you do as well, and others do not.
You call it a voucher and be honest about it, and opportunity scholarships, it's all painting the pig with, just a different story. But he does completely, and he's never hidden that he doesn't support school vouchers. That will be a bone of contention. It's how you get there. Now, school choice terminology, I truly believe that zoning should be opened up for parents and families depending on their work schedule. I've always said that because zoning is really restrictive. I wanted kids to be able to walk to their home school. And I still think you can come back to that part of it. And then you look at where your size is and where your compatibility is. But if your parents both are working across town and there's a school that has available seating, why not let those kids go to that public school?
As part of what he called the Nevada Accountability in Education Act, he said he wants to expand open enrollment policies, which is a reference to the zoning that you're talking about. Did anything else stand out?
Well, there were kind of code words in there, right? But what struck me about the speech was it was very clear that the governor was very intentionally trying to send a message that we need to work together. The public, and I used to say this a lot when I was in the legislature, the failure of the legislature is not the failure of the Democrats, it's not the failure of the Republicans, it's the failure of the legislature. The same applies to the executive branch. Those folks will either rise or fall together. And I really think that's the message the governor's trying to send. I really feel like you've got the right speaker, although I know there's been some contention between them two. I'm absolutely positive you have the right Democratic majority leader to build on that. And I couldn't help but notice that Senator Cannizzaro, I couldn't see what Speaker Yeager was doing, but she gave him a standing ovation in some cases. I think we ought to all be very encouraged about that. Yeah. But make no mistake, the governor was very deliberate. We have got to work together. And he didn't go as far as to say what I used to say, and that is the failure is the failure of all of us. Voters don't look at D's, they don't look at ours, they look at the success of the legislature. And I think we're at a place now that has to be the message, and I am exceptionally encouraged by it.
You pick your pieces that you really want to go down to the rug and fight for, but there were pieces here. And Nicole Cannizzaro has this wonderful thing for looking at fully paid pre-K. He has childcare, he has pre-K, he has literacy in there. So there's a place where you start to massage on how you get there. They've got the revenue this time around, so let's figure out how we go ahead and put the policy in place. You might have a knockdown, drag out on this other thing, but let's look at the major pieces. It's where do people live? How can they get to work? What type of salary do they have? Are they getting wrongly evicted for no good reason? Are they getting 10% raises in their rent for no new amenities or no reason other than maybe inflation for the property owner, right? Those are things that Democrat, Republican, nonpartisans all have to really focus on, because it's the quality of life issues that really hit home with people. And so I think there's places here. I mean, even the insurance for the wildfires. I was telling Warren, I said, I have a home on Mount Charleston. They're canceling a lot of my neighbors' insurance policies for having done nothing wrong. If you want to increase my rate, but don't leave us with nothing. So I appreciate that there's a recognition, and that's something that I think the state of Nevada has to take a look at, as well as how we pay our wildland firefighters, because that's a whole other issue at the federal level. But our state, we use the prisoners a lot of times, and there should be some accountability in paying them a decent wage as well if you're going to be out there clearing the brush and fighting the fires. So there's at least places that I think I can see where they can maneuver to work together on, and then have the knockdown dragouts on the real policy differences.
There's a real interesting evolution. We're talking about the pre-K programs. Chris and I were laughing earlier because see this scar right here? This is
Who gave that to you?
Chris did. This is all-day kindergarten where we fought. There doesn't seem to be a fight over this type of thing anymore. Everybody's sort of on the same. There are other issues that have become very, very partisan. But I think one of the things that's going to have to be addressed is state employee salaries. I mean, I was an adamant opponent of collective bargaining for state employees. I would not support, I wouldn't even hear the bill when I chaired the Senate Government Affairs Committee. But I said at the time, and I continue to say, if we're not going to allow collective bargaining, we have to do something about salaries, the wages. If we're not going to allow them to collectively bargain, we have to do the responsible thing. I'll be interested to see what happens there. But very encouraged about the teachers permanent. And I just think the governor kept his word. He had $2 billion for education. Now he's saying tonight, okay, we gave you the money. Now we want bang for our buck. How do you argue politically with that?
And what does it mean to a teacher to hear that there is this excellence in education fund he's planning on having that would reward Nevada's highest performing teachers and administrators?
I'm torn on that, because how do you define what excellence is? And each school, do you get brought up or brought down? I'd rather personally focus on building that into teachers' scholarships, paying off teacher loans, things that can actually recruit people into the classroom would be, in my opinion, much better used. I'm not a big fan for bonus, because it's one day, it's there and it's gone. It's not built into your salary schedule. That said, there are things that could come into play. I mean, the Hope campus, I've been long a critic of, don't you dare just house all homeless into one place and then you create worse problems. Now, if it's a triage, we were trying to come up with the right name of it earlier, but if you bring them in, you have an assessment, you have a strike force that comes in. Because Metro does spend their time, as do our firefighters, they're mentally ill. They shouldn't go to the jail. Where do we properly take them? If they can have an intake that diagnoses what's going on. If they're VA veterans, maybe you take them to the Veterans Hospital. So that gives me hope. But they have to have housing. We have to have transitional housing. And the county was doing a good job of renting small motels on Boulder Highway, and that's where we were housing people, because if they've been on the street longer than 6 months, there's a breakdown mentally as well as socially, and they don't know how to clean, how to wash dishes any longer. Any of those things that we take for granted as a homeowner, or someone at least that lives in an apartment, a house, or condo, it doesn't matter. We assume everybody knows how to get into a house and then how to grow within that place.
And that's what Campus of Hope is. I mean, it's the right approach. I mean, and Governor Lombardo understands that better than anybody else, but we've known this since I was in the legislature. The number one problem, the first problem, the threshold problem is law enforcement has no ability to do something with a person who appears to be mentally ill and acting out other than to take them to the emergency room. Right. The last place they should take them. Then they put them on a 72-hour hold and nothing happens. That is a threshold issue that has to be addressed before we can address anything else.
Yeah, so they need more hospital beds, for example, not just housing, but hospital beds for screening for the mental illness side of these folks.
So both of you are in favor of that Campus of Hope?
As long as it doesn't become one where everybody thinks it's a dumping ground and that's going to fix all the problems. No, you need housing across the entire valley, from Henderson to North Las Vegas to Boulder City. That's where housing should be, but you can have an assessment center that says, okay, you need this and this. You need you're treating your mental health with alcohol. Okay, so alcoholism will be secondary. The mental health component needs to be done first. If that's the idea and the concept that I'm hearing.
And as I understand it, it is. It's a centralization of services, not a centralization of homeless.
Okay.
So they'll be coming in from all across the valley.
Let's talk about what he mentioned in regards to housing, and he's calling it the Nevada Attainable Housing Act. It does have transitional housing included and pathways to home ownership for essential workers like nurses and teachers. $1 billion he wants to set aside in new attainable housing units. Why attainable, Warren? Chris, you want the answer.
Attainable because actually I'll give credit to Commissioner Kirkpatrick. It was Marilyn's idea because she went to and she's like, oh my gosh, you know what I can attain as a 30-year-old versus what I need to attain as a 70-year-old versus what I need to attend with no kids, with pets, without pets. All those factors, it's a different market that you need to have. So what works for one is not going to work for everybody else. So a studio apartment might be perfectly fine for someone that's 70 and doesn't have kids and family and whatnot. And so you have to look at that marketability for that group. Then you look at families, making sure they have a backyard or that the apartment complex has green spaces for their kids to be able to play. So those are factors, but it's what you attain, what you need at the beginning of your life is not the same as what you need at the middle or the end of your life. So attainability is really what we should call it and get away from affordability, because affordability still gives everybody the feeling of the, what do we call those, the NIMBYisms, not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard.
And it lets them think that, oh, you're just putting poor people in. Well, nothing wrong with poor people. I was there at one time in my life, right? So, but it gets rid of that issue and lets you really take a look at what do you need to produce for your community.
It does remove that stigma, but it also better describes the problem. As I said at the top of the show, it's not affordable housing, it's a housing problem. And so Chris described it perfectly. So it's just a better word. It better describes the problem, in my opinion.
What do you think of the amount of money, $1 billion? For comparison, I think of the Home Means Nevada under Governor Sisolak. That was $500 million in federal funding, ARPA funding, and that resulted in about 700 to 800 affordable housing units, which
it's
is just a drop in the bucket, right?
And $1 billion may be, but if it's to help people, say you're in a minimum wage job, and he identifies that's an essential job. Well, maybe you offset it with $10,000 of down payment, but you also make sure that their credit. And here's a game that's played out there that needs to be looked at nationally, is credit scores uses. It forces people to have a high credit score or a reasonable one. You actually have to be in debt. And so that's the way the system works. And so you have people that don't qualify under credit score, but they may actually have the wherewithal because of the payments from the family members that are paying into it. You can afford that mortgage. So affordability is no longer should be it. Attainability, and can you maintain that ability to pay for your apartment rent or a condo or a townhouse or a single family, whatever your goal is down the road. So it depends on what he wants to use that $1 billion for. I could see it being used for down payment assistance, I'm thinking, but I don't know.
Maybe, and as I said at the top of the show, the devil's in the details, because there's so many tentacles to this problem that if you get one wrong, you're going to affect the other side. So again, I'm glad I don't have to deal with it. Very difficult issue, so I'm anxious to see the details of that too.
I don't personally agree that we have to open up more federal land. We've got a lot of BLM land in town that we really should be using as infill development. And the water. We have to know whether or not, if we're recruiting people to live here, that we better make sure that we've got the water to be able to do that as a utility. So making them show an impact as a developer. Can you actually produce the water? Does the water exist? So those are other factors that have to be looked at.
And we don't know that. One of the things I've pushed for years is we've never really done a geological study in Nevada. We don't know how much oil, if any, is here. We know a little bit about mining because of the private sector, but we don't know anything about the water. We've used last century, and I'm not talking about 1900s, I'm talking about 1800s technology and perennial yield, which is appropriate, but we need to get our arms around how much water's out there before we start building too much or growing much more. I personally am convinced there's more water there than we think, but we need to get our arms around that as a state. So I've personally pushed for a geological study on that for years.
So you keep saying the devil's in the details, and so we will see these actual bills that come out of the
Correct.
governor's office.
He'll be drafting. He probably already has it drafted to some extent.
And in his proposals, what he delivered this evening, he didn't have details in everything, but in some proposals he did. One, for example, he wants to split up the Department of Health and Human Services and create the Nevada Health Authority to manage Medicaid, the health exchange, employee benefits, mental health funding, and other services. Is that a big deal, Warren?
It's a big deal, and it's a great idea. And here's what I'll tell you. We've been fortunate in Health and Human Services as long as I've been involved. We had Mike Wilden, who was a brilliant department head and did an amazing job. We've had Richard Whitley, who's one of the best we have in the state, but it's too much. It's absolutely too much. And the new director of that department is literally, the governor was not exaggerating when he said she's one of the best we have. So I'm optimistic, and I do think you need to divide those up.
Okay, that makes me think of something you said off camera would be a big deal as well, and that is talking about all these different committees that the state has. Why do you think that's going to be a big deal?
Well, because it's a big problem. I represent a lot of interests that appear before regulatory agencies, and the regulatory agencies have too much authority in Nevada. And I know it's hard, right? I know going through a regulatory process and hearing out the public and the concerned industries is hard. But as I always say, democracy's hard. There's a Supreme Court ruling that was just happily overturned called the Chevron ruling that gave state agencies broad discretion to interpret statute. And you would go talk to a judge or an attorney and say, I really think they've misinterpreted this. And they'll say, well, I've even had judges say, I agree with that. It's misinterpreted. I can't do anything about it because of the Chevron ruling. So this is a big bite of the apple. I think some of the Democrats will see it as empire building or power grab by the governor. I hope they don't, because what he's talking about here is a real problem. This is eating the whole apple. And I think we may need to step back a little bit and take a bite of the apple, but I'm so happy we're moving in the direction. I don't know, I mean, it consolidates all the lobbying, so that might make it difficult, but it consolidates a lot of power under the executive branch, which is where the power resides anyway. But I think I'm very happy the conversation's starting, but it's a big deal, and we're going to be talking about this when my grandson is governor of Nevada. But we'll hopefully get it right, or granddaughter.
Yes, there you go.
Actually, more likely my granddaughter.
He also talked about the Economic Development Policy Reform Act. I thought reform was a unique choice of words. But within that, he mentioned targeted tax credits for childcare facilities. No mention of potential film studios.
Fine by me. I don't agree with giving public tax dollars away to billionaire companies. They can, and two of them just decided they don't want to come here anyway, and they're fighting amongst themselves. Why would we give public tax dollars to them?
You're talking about Warner Brothers Discovery splitting with Berkshire Development.
That said, it's just briefly back to what Warren's saying. I hope that people see that all the boards and commissions have just mushroomed over the years, and anytime somebody couldn't get a bill passed, they created a board or a commission. You don't need 5 on schools, 10 on this, 14 on this. There should be an efficiency, because staff has to staff that. And so that takes time away from state agencies from doing their actual mission. So I think that there's a balance that could come about, and as long as it's not done with there's a justification. Who are you serving? What's your mission? Who do you impact? Those types of questions should be asked, and if they can't answer them, they should be gone.
Let
me just say, I don't have a problem with tax credits. I think tax credits are a very useful tool, but we have to be smart about it. And I will tell you, I'm really impressed with how the governor, I don't want to act like I'm just here to support the governor, but I think there was a lot of things that I have a hard time disagreeing with. The governor's been very cautious on this, the film tax credit. He's been, instead of just, it's very politically sexy to say Sony's coming here, and it may turn out to be a great idea, but I don't think the governor is buying off on it yet. He wants some proof, and I think that's exactly the right approach. I think tax credits are fine because of the economic benefit. We've seen that with the football stadium, and we're probably going to see that with the baseball stadium, but we can't be all things to everybody. And I think the governor's approach of saying we need answers first before, I'm not surprised he didn't mention it, because I don't think he has the details he needs to be able to get behind it yet.
restoring common sense in Nevada's election process. That was his final piece of policy that he put forward. And he talked about a bill working with the Secretary of State to make it so that mail-in ballots are at the location they need to be, or at the department where they need to be on Election Day, by the close of Election Day.
It sounds good, but what's the reality? If the feds get away with consolidating their mail distribution houses and moving Nevada's mail to Sacramento like they were proposing, now you're creating a problem because ballots were legally in the mail. They were postmarked by the Election Day. Then those should be counted. You have folks in the military that are coming in overseas with their ballots. So I think if they're going to have this conversation, they have to have some way to make sure that if it's postmarked by Election Day, those are the only ones they're counting in reality.
Yeah, but democracy's hard. And we've got
to sausage.
One of the most important things out there is that we have confidence in the system. And this is just kind of the political scientist in me. I'm sort of amazed at, with everything that goes on and all the catastrophes, how consistently we've had great secretaries of state. How does that happen? And we've got one now, and he recognizes these, Cisco Aguilar recognizes these things. And I'm, again, part of that bipartisan message that he talked about working with his office. And I think our Secretary of State's got some good ideas. And I really think there'll be some compromise.
With the ultimate goal of getting results faster.
Faster.
Okay.
And no one could disagree with that. It's just, again, the devil's in the details. How do you make sure you don't disenfranchise somebody that did mail it in and was postmarked on that date, and that's the cutoff date, but that you still accept it if that's the case? I don't know.
And this is just me personally, but I think this falls in line with the governor not wanting to pick partisan fights in his State of the State address, but I think we got to do something about ballot harvesting. I mean, ballot harvesting is a very popular thing with both parties right now. 4 years ago, it was a felony. And so because of COVID, we just said, well, it's a felony, but let's do it anyway, and didn't really give it the policy conversation discussion it deserved. I personally think that's more important than voter ID at the ballot.
To hear Speaker of the Nevada Assembly Stephen Yeager's response from the Democratic Party to Governor Lombardo's speech, visit our website, vegaspbs.org/Nevada Week. We'll have a link there, as well as the entirety of Governor Lombardo's State of the State address. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week on Nevada Week.